Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net, 3x pitch BioMetrics here of Jack Adkins. This is right after a labrum injury for him. So this is one of his first throws after rehabilitation. So it's at 66 miles an hour, but we'll be giving him an idea of where he is right now and what to work towards. So this is just before leg drive. We're going to be looking at the hip angles. And bottom left corner is the red check. That's right rotation. So you can see he's in 11 degrees of external rotation. So that's a good position to be. 43 degrees of abduction. Not bad. Ideally I'd like to see it go even farther into abduction, 45, 50. And then the next thing would be there's not enough knee extension or flexion here. So the knee flexion is the green check at 58. 60 plus, he's close, but I'd like to see maybe 65 as well. That would help. So just add a few degrees here and there through the knee flexion, ankle dorsiflexion, hip abduction, external rotation. And if I can do the drawing tool here, his hips are a little bit more forward and down. So I might have to take this graph off if I'm going to do this. Let's see. His hips get somewhere right here, and that femur is somewhere right there. That might be pretty extreme, so maybe somewhere up into this position here. Either way, I'd like to see it continuing to move forward and down. That would be ideal. So from here, we want to see how, as he goes into leg drive, is this bottom left corner, the right rotation, is that driving hip rotation. Because if the front femur is going to fly open and that's going to pull the back or the hips into rotation, that's also going to pull the back shoulder into early rotation. I want to see the femur internally rotate to drive the hip into rotation. So maybe I can draw this out for you to understand. So let's go back into the drawing tool here. I'm looking for not the femur, not this left femur, to swing open to drive this around into rotation, because that will pull this around into rotation. Okay, clear that out. I want to do the opposite. Because here's the thing is, I want to land close, so I really don't want this femur going anywhere but probably right here as I put down at front foot strike. So if this femur only has a little bit to go before I want it to land, because I want it to land close, I have to make sure that it's not obviously the driving force, because if this femur can only go to here, how is it going to pull this hip around all the way around, which studies show high velocity pitchers do better than low velocity pitchers. So the goal or the key is the back leg. So this femur needs to be driving rotation. So this one's just going to go to here and land. And this one is going to internally rotate. So it's going to spin, internally rotate. You'll see the foot spin. But also coupled with the momentum coming out of your leg lift, and extension, once this back leg gets linear, the extension to drive back into the ground, that's going to push, that's going to put torque into, if you know how the femur works, so here's the head of the femur, and then it goes into the socket like this. So it's like a little, little club here. So when this turns down, that helps pull the whole hip around. So just the act of turning the femur down can cause rotation. Okay, so this turns down with the added momentum and power that drives this hip through a lot more aggressively than the front leg would have done, and then it allows the back shoulder to delay. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So how do we know that's happening? It's going to be when he starts to move here. Look in that bottom left corner, the red rotation. When this goes, at this point, because I see that back hip is rotating, that the bottom left red here should be not still in external rotation. It should be aggressively firing into, rotation. So it's going from 11. Let's see it. Well, that's let's see. So you can see at a leg lift it's 25, and you can see it's just slowly internally rotating. There's a little acceleration here, just not much. And then as he hits front foot, then everything opens up, and that's more because the shoulders are rotating with it. So notice how the shoulders are rotating. So here's the thing. If the shoulders rotate with the hips, it's more easy to rotate the hips. But the key is that we rotate the hips without the shoulders, so we create that separation and delay. So that means to prevent that right now, he needs more force behind the back leg. So Jack needs to get more force out of that. So how do we do that? That's just continuing to ride the hips forward and down at the same rate, holding external rotation. So think about it. The more I go into hip abduction, so we're here at, before leg drive, we're here at 11 of rotation and 45 of abduction. The more I go into hip abduction and the more I hold external rotation, it will implement stretch shortening, and it will implement a release of that energy. So I'll go back to the drawing tool here and give you an understanding again. So the more I hold external rotation, so this is out, right? And I continue to move down. So you have a force moving down, and then you have a force pulling back. You're stretching because it's a shearing force. Force going this way, force going that way. It's a shearing force, and with tendons like rubber bands, that's going to unload ultimately wherever there's less stability, which is going to be in the leg because all this momentum is falling forward. It's going to then release internal rotation. So you're going to see the back leg fire into internal rotation. Okay. And as we go into front foot strike. And like I said, when you look at the graphs, that would be indicative in seeing an aggressive amount of internal rotation. Bottom left, red check. Out of 11, you'd see it go to not just 10 degrees, you'd see it go 20, maybe 30 degrees in the front foot, because you see it front foot, the leg is still slightly externally rotated. If you'd see, you'd see at some point it would go into internal rotation. You'd see 10 degrees of internal rotation or something. So that's what we're looking for. So that needs to be developed in how you load the back leg, and then unloading that, and also continuing to build momentum and power going forward, which will just accelerate that unloading. All right, so at front foot strike, we can see the front leg. If we're looking at the yellow, that's the yellow rotation. We can see that it's in 2 degrees of external rotation. That needs to be more, because if I had more hip rotation in front foot and I was in a more closed position, so you can see his femur's coming right at us, it needs to go a little bit to the left. That would be in more external rotation. And you all can see the pelvic position is off too. So when I look at, say, the pelvis, I can see it's at a side bend of T12. So it's going, let me get my drawing tool. It's going this way, the pelvis, when it should be more neutral. It should be balanced. And this is a stable pelvis right here. So if it's tipping this way, that's unstable. So now that back shoulder is going to be unstable. So it should be, 0. It should be neutral, not T12. And then the bend forward is 19. That's fine, because that helps push the trunk. We don't want that to be too aggressive, because the trunk, as the back or the front leg stabilizes and the front leg even extends, then that forward bend of the trunk needs to accelerate, because that helps throw the trunk forward. So let's see. Let's just talk about hip stability. So if, like I was saying, if these hips aren't neutral and they're tipping down here, also it's going to mean gravities want to go this way. Your arms are going to want to fly out over here. But if this is down, this hip is down, then this hip is unstable. The stability is over here. So this is unstable. And studies show when the hip is unstable, the shoulder is unstable. So now this is unstable. So what stabilizes that hip? Stabilizing that hip is going to be obviously landing more closed, doing what we said with the back leg femur driving rotation. But if we're landing the femur here, front leg femur here, in front leg position here, Now, and we're more force back here, then we have more rotation, and then we'd have a more stable hip, because it would just, between an internally rotate or an externally rotated femur across the body and a more driving back hip, that's going to slam the hip into the front femur, and it's just going to stabilize the joint, and you're going to see a more neutral joint position. So that would help also protect the arm. So him having, Jack having labrum problems is two things to me. It's the shoulders going with the hips. So this moving with this, or both vice versa. The instability in the hip leading to instability in the shoulder, and then the arm is taking more of the loading, specifically when he throws harder. So if we look at kinematic sequencing, and we can even bring in the hip and shoulder line. I even like bringing in the pelvic line, or not the chest line. Okay, we can see, there is hip to shoulder separation, not too bad, but you can see when he lands right here, that hip to shoulder separation quickly syncs up. So landing right there, ideally, is when you want to be at max separation. You can see it's already starting to close. And then if we look at the kinematic sequencing, which isn't too bad. I mean, it's good to see the red dot before the green. So that means there is separation, which is ideal. Hip speeds are peaking, and when they're peaking, the hip is pretty open. So the timing of peak hip speeds is not too bad, but the shoulder speeds aren't too far away. And then if you look at the maximum, it's at 400 degrees per second on the hip speeds. Someone in the mid to 80s to the 90s is going to be 700, 800. So, that's slow. But we know, he's not throwing at max effort here. And then the chest speeds at 780. They're going to be around somewhere around 1100, 1200 degrees per second. Okay, so I like the timing. You don't see the lead glove getting before the hip, which means the lead glove isn't really pulling it. And you definitely can see his momentum and his good hip rotation is driving his trunk, not his glove arm. And you don't see the glove arm higher than the chest, which means it's not extremely aggressive. The sequencing is good. It's just getting more energy to it. And obviously, as we get more energy, I'd like to see the red and green even separate even more, because studies show high velocity pitchers have a larger margin between the red and the green. Also, it's linked to less torque going to the arm. So as we go into forward trunk tilts, at front foot, if we look at it at front foot, the chest is back 2 degrees. That's fine. The chest is leaning way to the side, so we have too much of a tilt. But like I said, when that hip is tilting to the throwing arm, then and unstable, now the trunk is unstable, and that's why. It's just everything's falling towards, say, for the righty to third base. If we look at the torso graph here, we can see the hip to shoulder separation kind of goes off whack a little bit here, but you can see initially it's about 40 degrees, but once he stabilizes, and once he stabilizes front foot, which is about right where it kicks back on, let's see, probably more right here, it's very little, 8 degrees. So good separation coming out of the gate, but we lose it just because things are slowing down in the front foot when they should be accelerating into front foot. As far as we talked about the trunk tilts. We don't see forward trunk tilts. We saw it, like I said, we saw it back. The only thing is when I go back to that chest into pitch release, if we go at the moment of pitch release, we're still back. So this is a big problem. Hitting front foot here, about right there, we see the green check chest forward bend is back 6 degrees. That's fine at front foot, but then it continues to go back as the arm goes forward. And the reason that's happening is because that back femur is coming up, which is continuing to keep the hips back and the trunk back. And you can see as he goes into pitch release, the trunk is still back. We have to be in a forward trunk position. You can see the trunk is leaning back, extending back. We have to be in a forward trunk position. If not, the arm is trying to really take on a lot of stress as it pushes ahead of the trunk. Very, very stressful to the arms. It's something as he gets more, as Jack gets more power and more separation, he wants to feel with that front leg more energy transferring forward. That's going to be crucial for arm health and velocity as well. And you can see the front leg stays pretty stable. I don't think we saw any continued flexion on it. Hits front foot at the red check, 45 degrees, and it drifts, a little bit, almost 10 degrees, but it holds. So there is some instability issues there, and that's going to get harder too as the back leg gets more powerful to drive more hip rotation. So definitely that needs to be improved there. But once again, you go and you look at the very end result at pitch release, you see all this instability. We were talking about initially at front foot strike is just continuing to be a problem. And then once again, that puts more stress on the arm. So the hips is continuing to really collapse this way. The trunk now, as you can see, as it went to pitch release, the trunk is trying to basically pull back over. So, if you're throwing at high speeds like this, 90, and your hips are going down and your trunk is going back, you're overstressing these obliques. It was good to see your glove arm wasn't pulling aggressively. If you were on top of that, had a poor kinematic sequence, and you were pulling glove side, you would be just putting all that stress in your obliques, and then you wind up having an oblique strain, which is actually pretty common. So we got to clean all this up. We got to get stability here, like we talked about. That'll put the trunk in a better position to get stability. Also put in a better position to be not overloading the obliques, and then hopefully, once again, you can continue to keep the trunk moving forward into pitch release. So I think that pretty much covers it all. I think the key things is getting healthy with the shoulder, so you can start putting more force through the body, like move it mainly through that back leg to enhance more separation, and then really getting it to convert to the trunk, which it's not doing right now. That's going to be the key.